We are going to go ahead and get started. We realize that there will be people that will be joining on as we continue, but we want to make sure that we are being cognizant of everybody's time. So we want to welcome you to this week's Purdue at Westgate webinar series and the Indiana Defense webinar series. My name is Samantha Nelson, and I am the program manager for the Purdue Foundry Westgate at the Westgate Academy. We at Purdue at Westgate strive to promote business and talent growth, and we want to help support you as a startup, small business, and academia. We strive to be that regional hub of connection and support. Purdue at Westgate is located within the Westgate Academy, and the Westgate Academy is a technology incubator, training, and office conference center that is located within the Westgate at Crane Technology Park. That is located right outside of the gates of the Naval Support Activity Center in Crane, Indiana. Today, we are excited to be hosting live and via the web Dr. Sagar Semtani. He will be speaking on Trailblazing AI for Cybersecurity Discipline, a multi-disciplinary research roadmap. He is an assistant professor and Grant Thornton Scholar in the Department of Operations and Decision Technologies at Indiana University. He graduated with his PhD from the AI lab from the University of Arizona, and his research interests are in AI for cybersecurity, developing deep learning approaches for cyber threat intelligence, vulnerability assessment, open source software, AI risk management, and dark web analytics. He has published over 40 peer-reviewed articles in leading information systems, machine learning, and cybersecurity venues. He is deeply involved with industry, serving on the board of directors for the DEF CON AI Village and Executive Advisory Council for the CompTIA ISAO. We ask that you please mute your microphones during the presentation, but you may leave your video on if you're comfortable with that. If you have questions during the course of the presentation, we ask that you ask them via the chat button at the bottom of your screen, and Dr. Semtani will answer them after the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and will be sent to you for your reference, as well as a copy of the presentation. So with no further ado, I would like to hand it over to Dr. Sagar Semtani.
Okay, thank you so much, Samantha. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and get started then. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be speaking here today in a virtual format. As Samantha mentioned, my talk is entitled Trailblazing the AI for Cybersecurity Discipline, a multidisciplinary research roadmap. And this particular talk is loosely based off of a paper or an editorial that I'd written last year that I'm going to go ahead and put into the chat window right now. The paper is freely accessible, so if you want to get additional details in addition to the slides that will be sent out at a later point, then feel free to visit that particular link that I dropped into the chat, and you'll be able to get access to that particular paper as well. So the rough outline of what I want to go ahead and cover today, I'm going to spend about 40-45 minutes for the talk here, is first I want to give a little bit about my background and how I came about this particular topic and how I'm kind of working in this space and what are my areas of interest and so on and so forth. I do want to go ahead and summarize what my overall objective is after I summarize my background, give some disclaimers as well related to this objective. Third, what I'm going to go ahead and do is give an overview of what is AI for cybersecurity, what is the role of AI for cybersecurity, what are the different areas of focus, emerging themes, those types of things. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is give a sample illustration of what does AI for cybersecurity look like from a research perspective. I'll round out the presentation with some thoughts as it pertains to workforce development. How can we go ahead and get a deeper understanding or deeper approach to developing the workforce around AI for cyber, different types of archival mechanisms and different funding opportunities around this topic as well. So a little bit about my background and how I came about this particular topic. So as Samantha mentioned, I'm currently serving as an assistant professor in the Operations and Decision Technologies Department here at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. I got all of my degrees from University of Arizona. I graduated my PhD in 2018 from the University of Arizona's Artificial Intelligence Lab under the direction of Dr. Sinchen Chen over in the Eller College of Management. And during my time as a doctoral student, I really refined and focused in my dissertation on developing cyber threat intelligence from the dark web. And the dark web is a large conglomerate of platforms that contains huge amounts of illicit content that could be used for cybersecurity applications or to enhance cyber threat intelligence operations. And throughout my efforts in analyzing the dark web, I really tried to develop a lot of focus and emphasis in different types of methodologies that are AI-based, deep learning, network science, data, text, web mining, different types of visualization approaches, and so on and so forth. Today, my research has expanded out from the dark web to different types of AI for cybersecurity applications, including scientific cyber infrastructure security, AI risk management, open source software security, and so on. And currently, I'm leading a research group that's based out of the Operations and Decision Technologies Department that's focused heavily on AI for cybersecurity related topics. We have about 12 to 15 students at any given time working on different topics related to AI and cyber. And all of them are taking more of that deep learning based flavor to different types of cybersecurity applications. So what is my objective for the talk today? AI for cybersecurity is what I would call more of an emerging type of discipline and more of an emerging type of field. Even though it's been around for a while, there's still a lot of folks that are interested in getting into the space, and there's a lot of folks that are interested in expanding their coverage in this space as well. So what my objectives are really threefold in this particular talk. First is to introduce the role of artificial intelligence for cybersecurity. They're both buzzwords right now, but I really want to kind of demystify as to what does the role of AI for cybersecurity look like. Second, what I want to do is provide an overview of what existing initiatives or existing themes of research and practice currently exist within this discipline. And third, I want to summarize some potential mechanisms that we could consider to help progress the discipline as well. So some disclaimers here. First disclaimer is that I do not know everything related to this subject. Even though I've been around in this space since 2014, I still do not know everything in this particular area, and AI for cyber does predate me coming into the field. The second disclaimer is that these views and opinions in the slides reflect mine only, and they may change or evolve over a period of time as well. In fact, as I was preparing for this particular presentation, I found myself updating some of the content in the slides based off of some of my more recent experiences with the community and what they're focused in on. And then disclaimer number three, this is more for the offline audience, is that when it's presented live, these slides are supplemented with a lot of different examples of the concepts that I'm describing. But hopefully the slides are detailed enough such that you can still get the main points of as to what the presentation is covering without the live aspect to it. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and get into the AI for cybersecurity. Let's go into that overview there. So I want to take a kind of a 30,000 foot view level first. If we consider the cybersecurity discipline as a whole, and we consider some of the common tasks that cybersecurity professionals often have to do, security analysts, and so on, they could really be broadly categorized into 3 or 4 major areas, such as asset identification, control allocation, managing vulnerabilities that are being detected by major types of vulnerability assessment scanners, threat detection, and so on. And what we're increasingly noticing is that there's a lot of challenges as it pertains to these particular tasks. In particular, there's some challenges related to data overload, limited human resources, and several others as well. And when you combine these challenges together, we find that security analysts quickly become inundated with a large quantity of data that prevents them from actually doing their job in an effective and efficient manner. So enter AI and cybersecurity. They're not just buzzwords. These areas have been noted as a national security priority by the National Science Foundation, National Security Technology Council, National Academy of Sciences, and others. And on the right-hand side of the screen, what you can see is that I put up 2 screenshots of reports that has personally influenced me and my kind of viewpoint on AI for cybersecurity. One of them is Proceedings of a Workshop from the National Academies of Sciences. And another one is a technical workshop summary report from the NSTC. And increasingly, we're also seeing the NSF getting into the space as well. If we kind of look at the National Science Foundation's major programs around cybersecurity, we're seeing more and more themes related to AI emerging on that. And similarly, the recent AI Research Institute solicitation from the National Science Foundation, has indicated that the first major theme in there is on cybersecurity, next generation cybersecurity. So if we kind of just simplify what is the role of AI for cyber when we consider the common cybersecurity tasks as well as the different types of issues or challenges that security professionals often have to face as it pertains to data overload and so on, I can really summarize the role of AI for cyber as twofold. One is to automate many common cybersecurity tasks or sift through a significantly more data more efficiently and effectively than a human could. And then the second one is to be able to identify patterns in large data sets that are often missed by manual analysis. So I teach a class on the edX platform here at Indiana University entitled AI for Cybersecurity. I've run case competitions and so on around this particular subject as well. And what I teach students in my class is that AI for cybersecurity is really a four-phased approach, and I've kind of abstracted that out. It's not just applying existing AI algorithms onto cybersecurity data, although there are components of that in this process, but it's really kind of taking a holistic perspective in terms of how one could instantiate AI for cybersecurity practices. So the way I teach it is that there are four major phases in this overall life cycle. Fundamental cybersecurity principles and tasks is the first phase or the first part of this life cycle. And this particular phase is really truly understanding what is the organization, what is the assets within the organization, what are the different vulnerabilities within the organization. This could incorporate things like different types of threat models, asset discovery, threat trending, looking at the overall industry, seeing what kinds of threats are targeting them, and so on. But at its core, at its essence, is to go ahead and try and thoroughly understand what an organization is and what they possess, such that they can drive effective data collection approaches in phase two, and then subsequently in analytics as well. In phase two, it's really collecting a lot of data, and the type of AI that I'm referring to here is more of the data-driven AI. It's more looking at developing AI-enabled analytics algorithms based off of a lot of data that's been collected. So collecting relevant data that based off of the fundamental cybersecurity principles or tasks that an organization may be interested in. And I'll get into what types of data exist that may be relevant for collection in the next couple slides. In phase three is where the AI for cybersecurity actually occurs. It's developing or employing AI-based algorithms on top of the data that's been collected to hopefully gather some insights or extract out some insights or automate some tasks that are of relevance to the organization that they've identified in phase one. And then in phase four is going ahead and doing knowledge usage and dissemination, going ahead and seeing whether or not the insights that are drawn out are actually of value, refining processes, developing policies as to how and where AI should be used for different security practices and so on. It could also incorporate things such as data sharing, analytics sharing, and so on. So as what I'd mentioned in the previous slide, a lot of the AI that I'm referring to in this particular context is very data driven. So it's critical to understand what types of data exist that are cybersecurity related or could be used for cybersecurity applications. Broadly speaking, I've gone ahead and separated out the data sources into two major groupings: internal data sources and external data sources. And what I mean by internal and external is internal refers to what an organization themselves within their organization would be able to get access to. And external external means what's external to the organization, i.e. out for public consumption. Anybody can get their hands on it, quote unquote, anybody can get their hands on it, but it's publicly accessible. It still may have relevance in terms of developing cybersecurity practices for an organization. But let's talk about the internal cybersecurity data sources first. This could range from things such as the data that are being generated from workstations, VMs, different sorts of data storage, networking devices, network-based fingerprint data, NetFlow data, vulnerability assessments, biometrics, intranets, and so on. And what you'll see for each of these data sources is that there's a set of platforms or tools that are either generating the data or where the data can be gathered from. So if we consider things such as Docker or containers or VMware, we could extract out different types of metadata, such as the operating system, the applications that are installed on them, and so on. And similar things with the data storage, you could extract out things such as the file size, directory name, and so on and so forth. And I've gone ahead and given a set of sample metadata and data that's accessible within these different types of platforms. But some of the characteristics of internal data and why it's so valuable in AI for cyber is that it's often close to an organization's critical assets, i.e. that it belongs to that particular asset that may actually get attacked. So if we're looking at a web server that is within the control of an organization, they'll be able to collect the data off of that web server, and that web server may be grounds for attack for potential hackers to go ahead and try and extract out information from there and so on. Second, a lot of the data is machine generated, so it comes at a high velocity. So there's more standardized formats, but it comes at a very high velocity. So if we consider NetFlow data, for example, there's going to be a set of fields that are very consistent amongst the NetFlow data, but it's coming at a very high velocity. It also provides excellent insight about existing threats and also past attacks as well. So if you're trying to do any sort of forensic analysis in terms of what types of threats exist within your network, you can go ahead and do that based off of this type of data, where it might be a little bit more difficult to do that with external data sources. And the last bit here is that it's a pro and a con. It's some of the most commonly used data sources as it pertains to AI for cybersecurity education. So when many students are getting educated about AI for cybersecurity, one of the more natural places that they'll start off is some of these internal security data sources. NetFlow data, malware data, those types of data are often some of the starting points for many instructors when they're instructing students about AI for cyber. Now, if we switch over to the external cybersecurity data sources, there's a whole host of different external cybersecurity data sources that exist, or data sources that could be used for cybersecurity applications. I've gone ahead and listed out some of them, and again, in the paper that I've provided in the chat, you'll be able to see a further breakdown of these different types of data sources. But these data sources are publicly accessible. They can be collected through web crawlers, they can be collected through APIs and so on, but they can be used for different types of cybersecurity applications. Some of the data sources include social coding repositories such as GitHub or SourceForge. The amount of vulnerabilities that are accessible or that are in publicly accessible source code is unbelievable. Some of my research is actually focused on looking at all of the vulnerabilities within AI source code that are being committed by some of these major AI folks that are contributing to major conferences and so on. You can look at IoT search engines like Shodan. Google is a search engine for web pages. Shodan is a search engine for the Internet of Things. So you can go ahead and see what publicly accessible Internet of Things devices exist. Then we can look into different types of dark web platforms, and that's where the majority of my dissertation research was on hacker community analytics or dark web analytics. And you can see the different types of platforms and the data that are accessible within them, to looking at things such as commercial threat feeds, malware repositories, and then data sources such as news sources or conventional social media. You could go ahead and start to do more disinformation types of research and so on. But some of the characteristics that are of note and some of the characteristics that are different than internal data sources are external data sources often give a very good understanding of threats that are external to an organization that an organization may not have actually faced yet, but could be of threat to them in the future. So it's looking at the attackers or the potential attack vectors rather than looking at the attacks after they've occurred, as what may happen with looking at internal data sources only. It's primarily generated by humans, so it comes at a high velocity with a lot of non-standard formats with significant noise within them. Hacker forums, for instance, the way that hackers communicate on those platforms will often use language that will obfuscate what they actually mean. And so the data type is a lot more noisy, a lot more variations compared to what you'd have with the internal data sources. And it's often less included when teaching AI for cybersecurity. So those are kind of the ingredients, so to speak, related to AI for cyber. Again, I take a very data-driven approach in terms of AI-enabled security analytics. But if I were to kind of take a 30,000 foot view level in terms of how are people using these data for AI applications today, I can really kind of broadly group them into four major groupings or themes or initiatives that folks are deploying AI for cybersecurity. Cyber threat intelligence, disinformation, computational propaganda, security operations center, and then this last one is interesting, adversarial machine learning to robustify cyber defenses. Now, naturally, there's going to be an overlap between each of these different areas. There's going to be some overlap between CTI and security operations centers, between disinformation and adversarial ML, and so on. But broadly speaking, some of the initiatives are very much focused on leveraging the data that I described and developing AI-enabled algorithms on top of that data to extract out insights. So I'll go through some of the initiatives and kind of summarize some of the common tasks there. Cyber threat intelligence, looking at trying to identify emerging threats, key threat actors to help enable more effective security decision-making. And some of the common tasks there would be malware analysis, phishing detection, dark web analytics, and so on and so forth. Disinformation and computational propaganda was especially popular about 2 years ago with the election, and the election concerns around election fraud and swaying public opinion and those types of things. Common tasks there include bot detection, disinformation identification, fake news detection, those types of things. Security operations centers often at the heart of many enterprise organizations. Common tasks there could be log file analysis, vulnerability assessment and management, intrusion detection, and others. And then the last bit here, adversarial ML to robustify cyber defenses. It's kind of a mouthful there, but the idea is, could we go ahead and generate or synthesize fake content that looks very much real to help robustify our cyber defenses or help enhance some of our cyber defenses? Some examples there would be, could we automatically generate malware that is function preserving but can evade malware detectors, and as such we can go ahead and implement those types of malware, or incorporate those malware into those detectors to help robustify our defenses. Same thing goes for phishing, same thing goes for fake news, and so on. So there's a lot of work that has currently been done in this particular area, in this particular space, so cyber threat intelligence and others. And there's been some data sets that have emerged, some software, and then some other conferences that this work is commonly presented in. But if we kind of take a step back and see what are some of the key limitations within this space, I want to kind of highlight three limitations that I myself have noticed in this particular area. First and foremost is that there's often siloed resources and initiatives between academia and industry. I myself sit in an assistant professor position in the Kelley School of Business. I'm an academic, and that's where my training has been and so on. But I try to deeply engage with industry as well to help motivate some of my research and so on and so forth. But we need to get more of that type of behavior such that the academics are solving real problems and the practitioners are able to advance their approaches, possibly in a more rigorous way, or at least come up with new ideas that are not just applying existing techniques. And I think that my little story here is that when I was, this was back in 2019, I was an assistant professor at University of South Florida at the time. I had attended the SAT-CPI meeting in Washington, D.C. in November, and the SAT-CPI meeting is the principal investigators meeting for the Secure and Trustworthy Cyberspace program at NSF, and SATC is one of the preeminent programs for cybersecurity at NSF. There was a breakout session there related to AI and cyber, and a great set of academics there that were working. Funny enough that there was another conference called Conference on Applied Machine Learning for Information Security 2 days prior to that, to the SAT-CPI meeting. And that particular conference had amazing folks from industry, from Google, Microsoft, FireEye, now Mandiant, Sophos, Booz Allen, and others. And none of the folks that had attended CAMLIS had attended the SAT-CPI meeting and vice versa. So there was a clear gap to me that had been that was illustrated between both of those communities, that they don't necessarily talk to each other possibly as much as they could. So that I think is a key limitation that we could consider in talks like this and so on. The second thing is that there's often a lack of publicly accessible and realistic data sets. And what I mean by this is that a lot of academics are basing their analytics, especially the internal cybersecurity analytics, based off of past data or based off of data that may not be realistic of current scenarios or current situations. And bridging the gap between academia and industry is something that could help alleviate this issue as well. And then the third one is that model sharing and software sharing remains a challenge. So how do we share the different types of AI-based models with each other such that we're not constantly reinventing the wheel, whether it be in academia or in industry? So it's kind of considering the different types of models that are being developed, the different types of model assumptions and so on, and being able to go ahead and share that out with the community. So there's different types of education research opportunities that may come about as it relates to these limitations, ranging from different types of cybersecurity applications and data, considering new application areas, emerging data sources, refined data representations, to also more advanced AI-based methods, considering multi-view or multimodal analytics, explainable or interpretable approaches, augmented intelligence, to going all the way to AI-enabled decision-making. How do we go ahead and enable better decision-making processes based off of these AI-enabled algorithms? Could we go ahead and automate some of the predictions and not really have a human in the loop there? Could we have AI-enabled cyber defenses and resiliency and so on? But really underlying all of this is that I think that what's important is kind of taking a multidisciplinary approach, not just taking a pure technical approach, not just a pure AI approach, not just a pure cyber approach, but considering a lot of different factors in the development of AI for cyber practices, whether they be socio-technical, different organizational constraints, regulatory compliances, cultural considerations. This especially becomes true when you're looking at dark web analytics. You may be looking at Russian hacker forums, Arabic ones, and then the US. They all have different semantics in the way that they communicate about threats, all the way to thinking about cognition and psychology as well in terms of developing AI for cyber approaches. So I think what's useful is to go ahead and illustrate an example of AI for cybersecurity from a research perspective. So I'll spend about the next 5 to 8 minutes kind of illustrating this particular AI for cybersecurity research example. And I'm going to go ahead and motivate the work based off of some of the key limitations that we had gone ahead and seen in a couple of slides ago. So my research group is very much focused in on specifically cyber threat intelligence and security operations center, mostly looking at things like dark web analytics and vulnerability assessment. So let's go ahead and consider those particular angles here. And I've gone ahead and thrown out a scenario that if one were to have security operations center data, what could they do with that type of data? So let's consider the dark web analytics space and consider the vulnerability assessment space, both of them conventionally siloed in terms of AI for cybersecurity related research, and both of them motivated by different types of thought processes. On the dark web analytics side, it's really knowing your enemy, knowing the potential threats that may come about. And on the vulnerability assessment side, it's motivated by knowing your weaknesses and managing your weaknesses. So the fundamental research questions for this particular area is how can the exploits from the dark web be linked to known vulnerabilities of devices? And how can the devices that have vulnerabilities within them that we've linked to exploits from the dark web be prioritized based off of their vulnerabilities and exploits? And the ultimate value here is more holistic or proactive threat intelligence. Now, this particular work was published or it was accepted at MIS Quarterly, one of the top journals in the information systems discipline. So I'd be happy to share that paper as well if that's of interest. But I want to go ahead and just pull out some of the things from that paper and illustrate some concepts here as it pertains to this particular research. So that siloed component or the initiatives being siloed, here's an example or some evidence as such there. What I've gone ahead and done here is summarize past literature, past academic literature that's looked at dark web analytics. And there's some key observations. You don't have to go through and read the entire table. There's some key observations and gaps from this particular review. First, that there's a significant amount of focus on collecting and exploring and categorizing exploits, which is great, but they don't really go ahead and look at how they link to an organization's vulnerabilities. The methods were conventionally manual, but they've naturally gravitated towards more machine learning and deep learning based techniques. And currently there's a significant lack of work to identify how these exploits that have been detected could relate to an organization's vulnerabilities. How could they actually be used against an organization? Now, thinking about the overall process here, thinking about the different types of fundamental cybersecurity principles and tasks, the task that we're trying to execute is linking exploits and vulnerabilities. The data that we're considering is the dark web data as well as the vulnerability assessment data, and we're going to try and build some AI-enabled analytics on top of that. So what I always coach my students on is that really truly understand the characteristics of your data, especially when you're working with cybersecurity related data. What are the different characteristics of your data that could be used or leveraged when developing AI-based techniques or AI-based algorithms? So when we look at Hacker Forum exploit data, there's some key characteristics that are unique to Hacker Forums that's very relevant for creating AI-enabled algorithms. Each of the tools in dark web hacker forums often have a very descriptive name. So you can see specifically the technology that they are targeting, the operations that they're trying to do, such as the remote command execution, and different types of version names, for instance. So we can see some version names in some of the illustrations here. And they also have some clear categories of exploits as well. How do we go ahead and group up those exploits based off of their operations and so on? They also have a post date as to when those exploits were posted, and that becomes very valuable and very relevant to being able to develop, prioritize cyber threat intelligence. Newer content is generally more relevant than older content. So that's on the dark website. If we consider the vulnerability assessment data, many different types of vulnerability assessment tools that are currently in use by many organizations may include things like Burp Suite, Nessus, OpenVAS, and others. And you can see some of the data that comes back from these vulnerability assessment tools. Each vulnerability will typically have a short descriptive title of the vulnerability. There's often a list of systems that are susceptible to that particular vulnerability. And many of the vulnerabilities also have a CVSS score. That's a severity score that ranges between 0 and 10 that indicates how severe that vulnerability is if it were to get exploited. So if we kind of take a step back, the data that are available that could be used for AI-enabled algorithms for on the dark web side could be the exploit name, and then the vulnerability side could be the vulnerability name. And there's thousands of these vulnerabilities, thousands of these exploits. So developing an approach to automatically link them together could prove to be very valuable to organizations. So here's the AI-enabled algorithm part. Again, the overall objective here is to link exploits and vulnerabilities based off of their short text similarities with the novel AI-enabled algorithm here. I want to just emphasize a couple things here. I'm not going to go into too much depth about this particular algorithm. First, the details of the algorithm are in the paper, which I'd be happy to share. But the other part is that a lot of AI algorithms, when they were developed outside of the context of cybersecurity. So they require some customization or they require some adaptation in order to operate within a security context. And hence where these red boxes come into play. What we've gone ahead and done is that we've replaced some of the major components of an existing algorithm with BIOS TM layers and novel attention mechanisms that captures the unique text characteristics between the dark web exploit name and the vulnerability name and prioritizes the similarities between those names when trying to identify what is the most relevant exploit for a particular vulnerability, hence some of the methodological contributions here. In addition to linking exploits and vulnerabilities, we notice that there's other types of metadata that's relevant as well. I won't go through too much of the details here, but we can go ahead and formulate new vulnerability severity metrics that are designed to help prioritize specific devices based off of the age of an exploit and then the severity of the vulnerability. The idea for this particular severity metric is that if a device's severity score is going to be higher, if it has more vulnerabilities and or more recent exploits associated with it. With that, you can go ahead and an organization can deploy the algorithm in this particular severity metric to identify which devices they should prioritize over other ones based off of the vulnerabilities and exploit linkages, and then the severity and age of the exploits or of the vulnerabilities and the exploits respectively. So if we were to deploy this out, we went ahead and took the top 8 US hospitals and did a vulnerability assessment of their publicly accessible device landscape, and identified what types of vulnerabilities and exploits could target those vulnerabilities. You can see that the DBSM scores has some scores and rankings and ratings here. The one that kind of bubbled up to the top is a partner's eCare portal, and I've gone ahead and anonymized the last 3 octets of the IP ranges here. But you can see that this particular partner's eCare portal has vulnerabilities that are related to OpenSSL, different types of cross-site scripting activities, and so on. There's some related exploits that may target those vulnerabilities as well. So some of the things that are some of the benefits that could occur with this type of analysis is that network administrators can prioritize this device when analyzing their weaknesses as opposed to some of the other ones that are on their network. Okay. So that's just an illustration. The illustration shows on how multiple types of cybersecurity data could be fused together to develop more holistic AI based approaches, and how the AI-based approaches are not just off the shelf, but they're actually more they're more customized based off of the characteristics of the data. So I'll go ahead and wrap up the presentation here. For the last 5 minutes, I'll spend on kind of some ideas for workforce development, archival mechanisms, and different funding opportunities as well. So when I was at the University of Arizona, I was a scholarship for service student, and the scholarship for service program is designed, it's funded through the NSF, it's designed to help train the next generation of cybersecurity professionals for eventual placement in government, or more recently in academic positions as well. So I went into a public state institution, which is totally within the realms of the SFS stipulations. But I was actually approached by Dr. Victor Piotrowski, who's one of the main program directors for the SFS program. And he wanted to see how could we go ahead and cultivate a workforce related to AI, it's cyber AI. So how can we develop new cyber AI professionals? How can we inject cybersecurity and AI into existing SFS curriculums? And one of the things that we had talked about, and I've given some of this talk at SFS PI meeting actually last April, we kind of looked at it from kind of 3 different angles in terms of enhancing the cyber AI workforce. One could be workforce development, looking at the workforce itself. Another one could be publication or archival opportunities that would help sustain the discipline over a longer period of time. And then the third one is different funding opportunities that could help support systematic research and education to help facilitate publications and also workforce development as well. So looking at the cyber AI workforce, and I'd welcome thoughts on this as well. Some of the ideas that I had related to this were looking at the local, regional, and national levels. When I was at the University of South Florida, I think one of the things that they did very well was that they were able to engage with the local community very well in terms of looking at the different types of cybersecurity organizations within the region, looking at different ways of recruiting, identifying the data sources that could be used, and being able to leverage that as well. And Purdue and IU do an excellent job of that as well. So looking at it locally from a local perspective, being able to look at local high schools, middle schools, and so on, and be able to recruit talent from a younger age. And the reason why I bring this one up is that oftentimes, when you ask a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? You get the conventional answers of I want to be a firefighter or a doctor and so on and so forth. The ones that do say scientists, they don't even know that cyber AI is even a potential field or an opportunity. So kind of looking at it from a more local level to help enhance that type of awareness. The second level could be more at a regional level. And I think that, Samantha, thank you for inviting me for this, because this is a great example of a regional level activity between Purdue and IU. I know that there's the friendly rivalry between both, but the kind of that regional perspective in terms of conferences, meetups, different types of cybersecurity ranges or infrastructures, and so on. And then at the national level, considering things like surveying the overall government, to see what do they actually need in terms of AI for cyber, engagement between academic and practitioner venues, and then increased calls maybe from the National Science Foundation related to data set sharing, tool sharing, but also from the industry side too. I'm deeply invested in organization CompTIA, one of the largest nonprofit trade associations, provides a lot of cybersecurity certifications. So one of the things I've been really pushing to them is how can we increase the amount of data sets and tools that they have access to the larger public. As it pertains to more of the academic route or the more archival opportunities, I've gone ahead and summarized different types of venues that are available. And again, this is also in the paper as well. Different types of academic venues, practitioner venues, pure CS venues, and different NSF meetings as well that folks can consider. I'll go ahead and point to a couple of ones that I find to be very relevant and important to this particular group. CAMLIS is a great venue, Conference on Applied Machine Learning for Information Security. They do a great job of bringing in cutting edge research from industry in particular. And I was program co-chair this past year, and I'll be program co-chair this year as well. But CAMLIS does a phenomenal job of being able to bring together a lot of folks from industry. And it was actually, the lead conference chair was actually a Purdue grad. His name is Edward Raff. He's currently at Booz Allen Hamilton. He's also at UMBC as well. Then there's different CS venues as well. These CS venues are more for the cutting edge AI based techniques, but there's been some workshops that have cropped up that takes folks from the pure AI angle and then instantiate some of their AI based approaches into the cybersecurity context as well. And then from the academic point of view, there are funding opportunities as well. A couple of years ago, there was this Dear Colleague letter that had gone out related to cybersecurity education, the age of AI. It was through the SATC and SFS programs. And there were 30 projects that were selected out of about 400 that were invited for full proposals and that were eventually funded as well. But the projects that came out from this Dear Colleague letter, when I talk with the program managers, they indicate that those are the types of projects that they'd like to see a little bit more of from the SATC program and the SFS program as well. And then we look at different types of funding opportunities. They ranging from early career, infrastructure-oriented, core research opportunities, transition to practice, and then education-oriented ones as well. And again, these are in the this is in the paper as well. So if you wanted a list of that, more of a resource as such there. So to conclude, kind of just zooming back out here, AI and cybersecurity have emerged as really important national priorities. If we kind of boil down what is the role of AI in cybersecurity, it can help automate prevailing cybersecurity tasks, asset management and control allocation and so on. It can help detect patterns that are missed by conventional analysis. And there's been a lot of really good progress so far, but there still remains siloed initiatives, lack of model and data sharing, and other issues as well. And there still remains significant opportunity to cultivate the next generation of cyber AI professionals as well. What I really view with this particular topic is that it's a team sport. No one person can go ahead and address it. It has to be an interdisciplinary, it has to be a multidisciplinary approach. And I would be very happy to talk about this further offline. And I think we have about 15 minutes of questions as well. So thank you everybody for listening to this talk. Hopefully it was useful for everybody. We'll go ahead and take a few questions and answers at this point. But if we don't get to that, then I'd be happy to talk about this topic as well. And my contact information is listed here. It's also on the paper as well. All right, so I'll go ahead and stop sharing there, Samantha, and hopefully we have enough time for Q&A here.
Yeah, I think we do. Thank you, Dr. Samtani. That was a very informative presentation. We do have one question from one of the people right now. It's just, how is your AI research in MIS different from those of the computer science department?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that this is often a question that I get is that, are you just a computer scientist hanging out in a business school? And I think that that's a very valid question as well. I know that we have a couple of information systems scholars here as well that have been in the information systems discipline with Al and Bala here. Thank you both for attending. But to answer the question directly, a lot of my entire training is information systems, actually. So I was never a computer scientist. I never really even took computer science classes. The big thing for my type of research within the information systems space is that I primarily target journal venues. So MIS Quarterly Information Systems Research, JMIS, those are my top venues that I go after. Not that I don't target CS venues, but I certainly do. But that's more of a cursory high-level answer. Fundamentally, a lot of my research is deeply instantiated within the context of organizations. I rely heavily on the perspectives of organizations, or I pull from organizations to drive my research. And similar to that, I don't just focus in on the technical development of my research activities. I also try to do things like user evaluations, user studies, and try to ascertain the usefulness, adoption of the technologies that I'm developing within the context or the applications that I've designed them for. So the MISQ paper that I was talking about, that the research illustration came from, there was a user study that was actually part of that as well. Typically, when I publish at CS venues, I don't get asked those questions from reviewers about the usefulness or those particular aspects, the adoption and so on. But when I publish in IS venues, I certainly get asked those questions as well. So organizational perspective, user evaluation, kind of going through the whole 9 yards. Not to say that CS scholars don't do the same thing, but that's definitely almost like a prerequisite or a must in terms of being within an IS program. And I enjoy doing that as well. Okay.
Hello?
Samantha, I think you're muted.
Hello? Hello?
Oh,
Jeffrey?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, good evening again. This is Jeffrey. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, so thank you very much. For me, I'm a student master's in the African Center of Excellence, Internet of Things, in Rwanda, Kigali. How my question is how AI can be used in cybersecurity defenses?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the answers to that particular question, if we consider what are the different types of defenses, or another word of using it is controls, what types of defenses exist? They could be malware detectors, they could be fake news detectors, they could be some sort of detection-based approach or prevention-based approach as well. I think overwhelmingly the way that AI is being used for cyber defenses right now is in that adversarial machine learning to robustify the cyber defenses. So I'll go into depth about that a little bit further right now. The idea for that is that could we go ahead and generate fake content that is still function preserving, that we could go ahead and evade existing defenses with that fake content. The primary methods of doing this are reinforcement learning and generative adversarial networks, because they're exceedingly good at A, being able to search through a large search space of possible options for how to generate fake content, and then B, being able to generate the fake content itself. So a lot of folks are looking at developing reinforcement learning or generative adversarial networks to go ahead and synthesize fake content that still preserves the functions of that particular threat vector, and then seeing if their existing cyber defenses can actually detect those threat vectors. The goal is a zero-sum game, trying to identify whether or not the attack can actually evade the defense and the defense can actually detect the attack. The idea of generating those generative adversarial networks or those reinforcement learning techniques is to create attack vectors that the defenses cannot detect any further. And once that happens, you can go ahead and use those new attack vectors to help robustify the cyber defense, maybe updating the malware detector signature, or maybe updating the malware detector's approach to detect those types of variants. So that's the prevailing or predominant way today that a lot of folks are using AI for cyber defense applications.
Good. I hope that answered Jeffrey's question. One of the questions we have is just, do you have an open PhD position with you?
I do. I do have an open PhD position. We are actually in the process of recruiting PhD students right now. So that's all I'll say about that. The application due date, I will say, was I think about a month ago. So
Good, good, good. Well, if anybody has any further questions, he has provided his contact information, so you can certainly reach out to him after this presentation. I know that that's one of the things we want to encourage within this presentation, these types of webinars, is to make sure that there are those conversations that are happening. The more collaborations that happen, the more interesting things that come about. So we want to thank you, Dr. Samtani, for your participation in the presentation. As mentioned, a copy of this presentation recording will be provided to everyone that is RSVP'd. So you'll be receiving that here this afternoon yet. Also, make sure you visit our calendar events on our website. It's westgate-academy.com. You can see all of our past webinars and events, as well as future events. And one of the events that we're going to be having in the near future, it's on March 1st, is an Autonomous Day 2.0. This will be an in-person event that will have displays, demos, speakers, panelists. It's mostly an all-day event. So we've done it in the past. It was very successful. So if you are in the area or want to come to the area, make sure you visit the Westgate Academy on March 1st. We'll be putting more information out there this week for that. There'll be information on industry and government and academia that will also be added to those presentations. So we look forward to hearing from you regarding that. We hope you enjoyed this presentation, and we hope that you join us again for any of our future events. So we thank you, and we hope you have a great and healthy week. Thank you, Dr. Samtani.
thank you.
My last, my last question, if you don't
Sure.
mind.
Sure.
Yeah. Generally, so my last question is about like how AI is used in security and surveillance.
Is used in what?
How AI used in security and surveillance.
Surveillance. Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think the surveillance aspect, the AI aspect, really comes into play in terms of those external data sources, looking at the different types of external data sources from social media perspective in particular, looking at sifting through the content for on social media platforms to ascertain what folks are talking about, how they're talking about it, emerging threats, those types of things, but also taking a look at things like looking at personally identifiable information to see if personally identifiable information is being publicly shared, and then whether that publicly identifiable information could be automatically put together to reconstruct or surveil people's backgrounds and so on. We see this primarily with the dark web side, so being able to look at the types of content that's available on the dark web and then seeing whether or not you could reframe or pull together somebody's identity and then see how they're actually operating. You can come to like global mass surveillance from that perspective.
Great. Great. Thank you. So again, if you have any other questions, we encourage you to contact Dr. Samtani. I know that he would be more than happy to answer any of those. So again, thank you all for joining us, and hope you have a great week. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Take care.